if you allow the collateral of the system, because the US is the most indebted economy in the history of the world as a percentage of world GDP.
Whoa.
It's over 100% of world GDP in debt.
That's a lot.
And that's not just, that's the country, the people, the corporations, right? It's the whole lot, the total debt. So what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Do you want to let all of that collateral go to zero, the whole system burn to the ground, and a complete destruction of lifestyle, even whether we're living in a fancy lifestyle driven by debt and other stuff? Do you want to destroy all of that? I don't think you would. I don't think anybody would. So in which case you need the central banker to try and just juggle the bloody balls in the air. And yes, we get angry because it kind of gets the rich get richer because it keeps driving those assets up, and the poor get poorer. So we have to focus somehow on that. But America doesn't like the idea of helping poor people. They think it seems to be, you're a communist. It's ridiculous. You know, why would you not have a welfare state if you've destroyed the ability for wages in real terms to rise over the last 50 years? They've not risen at all. So you need to think about this. And this is why technology people are thinking about universal basic income. But the crowd is not always very good at making these decisions either. And Brexit is a great example. Brexit, the unintended consequences have been enormous.
I don't know anything about it. So what have been the second and third order consequences?
So there was, all these Brits love to go on holiday to Spain, France, Italy. They had all their holiday homes. They got to retire. They wanted to spend 6 months a year in one country. And now they're finding they're not allowed to. And they have to leave. And they're like, what? But we're British. How dare you? And we're like, no, you're not part of the EU anymore. You have no rights. You have no rights over the healthcare system there. And they're like, well, this is not what we agreed to. At the border in France, you can drive a car from France to Spain to Italy to Austria, do anything you want. You don't even go to passport control. Brits at the border in huge long lines getting in and have to produce all the right papers. They're like, but we're British. How dare you? Like, you voted out. So normally speaking, that should have been done not as a referendum. It should have been done as a political process. And that was going on as a process that takes years of debate and discussion. And voters can say, we like that party because they're against GDP growth is population growth plus productivity. If you've got an old population, you don't have any productivity because they don't work. And an old population means your population's shrinking, so your GDP goes down. So Japan has suffered that. And what happens generally is that's offset by leverage. People add debt. So Japan is the older population. They do have more productivity because they've got industry there, and the industry can become productive over time. The UK's got no industry left. It's just service economy. There's nothing left. And because they've now knocked themselves out of the EU, I could be a guy who manufactures tiles and I could sell them to some, guy in Paris, some construction firm in Paris. Can't do it anymore without taxes. So you've completely ruined that. So all of their levers now are basically devalue your currency. They've got very little room for maneuver. The Japanese have had a lot of room for maneuver because the population saved so much money because they have a system of saving. The Brits, like the Americans, have a system of debt. It all came from actually Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan is where it all came from. But the Japanese are slightly opposite. So they kind of manage their economy better. So they don't have violent swings. It just doesn't grow. It just doesn't go anywhere. Because the logical conclusion of world population growth, which is essentially going to zero, so the birth deaths rate of the entire world is like 1% or something crazy now. So yes, populations like India and the Middle East are very young, but they've all stopped having kids. So the whole world is going through the same cycle on a lag, with Japan at the front, then Europe and South Asia, South Korea, Taiwan, all the same, then the US, then Latin America, then Africa, the Middle East, and India. So all population is going to collapse, which is what Elon Musk keeps talking about. And the solution to that is technology, i.e., you need to create productive units with less people. Because you've lost the population.
You need to create
growth.
productive units that somehow funnel the money into other people's hands. Or are you saying that as long as they're creating something that people can get somehow, some way, that the quality of life maintains? Like, I'm trying to make that make sense.
Yeah.
So I keep coming back to velocity of money. If money isn't getting into my hands and going out of my hands for things that I want.
No, you don't matter in this equation, really, because the big GDP growth is the growth of the population, which is shrinking, right? So that whole part's gone for the whole world. So immigration doesn't solve it. It can solve it for single countries, but not for everybody. And it's the phase that is almost inevitable. One is that at first we become augmented humans. So we use the AI. So I use Grammarly, right? That's augmented AI to make me a better speller because I'm pretty ADD and I can't spell anything ever. So it helps me. Okay, that's augmented human. And that will become much bigger. But obviously in the end, we don't need humans.
Yeah,
and that's the singularity.
Yes, I think the singularity will probably come even sooner if we keep the definition that the singularity is the moment at which we can no longer predict the future, because it's just changing so fast. Okay, so
I think the singularity is when the predominant species is the computer.
Okay, so you predict a world where we merge with computers or where computers wipe us out, or we just stop breeding?
We start first, and it always ends up in the latter because of the exponential knowledge accumulation. There's a great book, and you've got to read it, Homo Deus, has a fixed cost because we need to get out of the ground, and we can get efficient at it. So shale became more efficient, so it lowered the cost of energy overall. But as we start marginally eating away at new forms of energy, whether it's solar, wind, nuclear, whatever it may be, right? Hydrogen, who knows, right? And yes, of course, right now they don't scale big enough to replace fossil fuel. And yes, we'll use fossil fuels for chemical manufacturing and stuff like that. So it's not going away as an industry. But all of these forms, geothermal, end up cheaper than at generating energy than others, because technology keeps driving them. Even fossil fuels have got cheaper, really, because of shale and stuff like that. You can produce more of it at the lower price, but we just don't necessarily, because we need to extract it out of the ground, it's actually harder than eventually extracting out of the sky more efficiently. So I think the cost of energy comes down, so it's negligible. Okay, what does that mean for society? I mean, that was the one restriction we had, was output from a unit of energy. Kilojoule, what it gives us in productivity. Well, if that changes the whole game too. I think this is all up for grabs.